Good day, fellow cartographers, and welcome to another report on Parallel Disney. Today's report will be on the anomalies found at Splash Mountain. Splash Mountain is a family-friendly log flume dark ride with thrilling elements and can be found at 3 of our dimensions: Disneyland, Disney World, and Tokyo Disneyland. For our report on Splash Mountain, we'll be using Disneyland as our control or baseline assessment. The first category of anomalies that we'll be going through will be the Facade. Here are some aerial images of the 3 various Splash Mountains. As you will quickly observe, they are rather similar, but there are still numerous varying differences. First thing we can notice right off the bat is that the show building is different, as well as the distance from the show building to the main facade. There's also a rock slide that is only at Disneyland, and the overpasses are also completely different. At Tokyo, the ride building is a completely different shape. The path that leads to the ride building is almost non-existent at Tokyo, as well as the missing rock slide, and there's not even a little house that you go into, and the overpass is also different yet again. Some additional unique features to Tokyo is this additional bend in the river, and the train does not bisect it. Something you may or may not have noticed is that I actually had to mirror the image of Tokyo to make these comparisons. There are several little changes that are a little tricky to describe in their nuances, so here's some overlapping layers of the various Splash Mountains so that you can see the little subtle differences as they fade in between each other. In Disneyland, the ride vehicle is made to look like a single log. There are 5 rows where people sit in line, except for the last row, which could potentially hold 2 guests as long as one is small enough. There are no lap restraints. There's also a little sculpture of a rabbit's head on the front. The ride vehicle at Disney World is made to look up like 2 logs this time. There are 4 rows containing 2 people each, having a total of 8 potential passengers. There are lap restraints on this one. The rabbit sculpture at the front this time is full-bodied instead of just the head. The logs are nearly the same at Tokyo as they are at Disney World, but this time the rabbit has its clothes painted. Also, the vehicle identification number is now on the side instead of the front. In Disneyland, you appear to enter through some sort of barn, and you quickly get a look at some of the various tools and equipment that are used, and a pretty awesome, huge fireplace. As you pass that, we go around a corner, see a statue of Brer, bear, fox, and rabbit, and continue up some stairs, and then we get to see an overlook of where we just entered. Soon we find ourselves transitioning into a cave, and then we get a short overlook of the main loading area. And there's also a little glimpse inside the attraction itself. In the loading area, we found ourselves in a sort of courtyard between the barn and the cave system. At Disney World, the entrance is rather similar, but the building that you enter is less boxy and has these neat little angles on it. There's also an island in the center that has some additional barn equipment, and there's a lack of a fireplace. As you head for the stairs, the statue is no longer there but is relocated elsewhere, and there's not an acorn on the banister. The chandelier is much larger. There's this interesting bend in the queue line, as well as a lack of stairs. There is no real transition of building into cave, there's just this different kind of wall altogether. There's a window that allows you to see into Brer Frog's house. There is an overlook at about the same location, but this time the view's not obstructed by some cart. About where there's a glimpse into the ride at Disneyland, there's a few portraits of various characters and locations of this fictional world. At Disney World, the queue area seems to be surrounded by multiple businesses. As Disneyland, it just seems like you're in the center of one. The Splash Mountain at Tokyo is quite its own element. You pretty much enter into a cave right away, and it's rather dark. You also sort of spiral down, getting multiple views of the loading area from different levels. There is an owl animatronic that you walk past in the queue, and the queue is entirely enclosed the entire time. At Disneyland, we quickly find ourselves approaching some warning signs before coming upon the first lift hill. After we hit the lift hill, we find ourselves going around a rather bushy briar patch as we see a waterfall in the distance. Then we enter what appears to be kind of a sawmill thing. And this is our second lift hill. And there is also an owl on the left side, along with various equipment and barrels. As we peek this hill, we see some equipment on the left as we go beneath a wooden staircase. As we go around the next bend, we find ourselves passing Brer Rabbit's house, followed shortly by Brer Fox's house. On the right we find some food stores, and then on the left a little birdhouse. Now we find ourselves going by Brer Bear's house. As we straighten out, we see this interesting house that's really hanging on the edge, and we approach our first waterfall, appropriately named Slippin' Falls. As we accelerate down the waterfall, we find ourselves swiftly approaching a cave. Before reaching that cave, we see another house that's attached to a tree. A fun difference right off the start is that at Disneyland you're under a man-made structure all the way up to the start of the lift hill, and then you're kind of in a cave. While at Disney World, you go right from man-made structure to cave, and then you're in the cave almost the entire time up until you get to the lift hill. The warning signs at this point are also different. As you ascend the first lift hill, you find this frog that is actually telling you the story of Splash Mountain. At this point we can see that there's more water on the left side and that the briars extend even into that pool. The branches of the briar patch appear to be thicker, however it's less dense, and you can also see the missing rock slide on the roof of this sawmill building. As we approach this second building, we notice that there's this mysterious wall that's not there at Disneyland, and it's on the right as well as the left. The owl is completely missing, and another thing of note is that when the building transitions into the cave at Disney World, it's a lot more rocky as Disneyland is quite smooth. As you reach the peak, you are not greeted by a staircase this time, but there is a welcome sign. Where Brer Rabbit's house once was, there is now a critter elixir cart, followed by a garden with an unnamed house. There is now some laundry hanging on the right side. Some muskrat moonshine is being created. There is a signpost pointing out various locations, including Brer Fox's lair. Instead of a singular birdhouse, there's a whole bird community and they're whistling along to some music. And now we find Brer Rabbit's house, which is at a completely different location. Brer Bear's house is in the same location, however the mailbox post is broken up into segments. There's milk outside, as well as bear tracks leading to the door, but the light, bell, and club are all missing. The door and door frame are also completely different. As we approach Slippin' Falls, which it is still named the same here, we notice that the house that was up above at Disneyland is no longer there, but this time there's this nifty little suspension bridge that has a broken plank. As we descend under this other bridge, we notice that at Disneyland it's made of wood, while the one at Disney World is more like just a part of a cave. As we approach a cave, we notice that there's a log suspended overhead with a beehive on it, and it's more square while Disneyland is lacking that beehive and is round. Tokyo has more in common with Disney World, so we're going to do our comparisons that way. As we start our journey in Tokyo, we see the frog that was there at Disney World, but this time he's a little further down the mountain and he's on the other side. And this actually makes sense because if you remember, these attractions are actually mirrored. His whole sitting area is rather different, and this time he's on a box. The cave ceiling at Disney World is a little more cracked and has higher contrast than that at Tokyo. As we go into the river in front of the Briar Patch, we see that it is more dense than at Disney World, and actually kind of looks a bit more like it did in Disneyland. And also, we go under a cave instead of a man-made structure like there was at Disney World and Land. This time we just go next to a house. As we ascend up the cave, we see that it has been reinforced by somebody with various wooden planks and studs, and there's some barrels on the side. As we get to the top of the hill, there's a staircase that is missing from Disney World. Before we get to the bend, we see the treehouse and garden, which shows up a little later at Disney World, and there's not that elixir cart. At this point, you don't really see any more residences, and it's just a bunch of fancy rockwork, some overhanging, and those wonderful overlooks that you get, up until you get to the waterfall. When you get to the waterfall, you're already in a cave instead of approaching it at high speeds. During this bit of travel time, at Tokyo we find ourselves already in the show building, while at Disney World as well as Disneyland they're still trying to catch up. Back at Disneyland, we find ourselves in the main ride building where we see various birds having a good time singing, along with additional animals such as this alligator and frog that's kind of using them as a hammock. And now we see that Brer got caught in his and Brer Fox's own trap. At this point we see Brer Rabbit in the middle of his journey, possibly trying to hitchhike, but you wisely pass him by. As we pass by the sign to Rainbow Ponds, we find some possums overhead. As we continue along, we see that Brer Rabbit has found himself an interesting way to get around. As we go down this quick waterfall, we find that an alligator is also trying to hitch a ride. And then we see Brer Rabbit laughing. At what? I'm guessing it must be the fact that Brer Bear has got his rump stuck in a stump. As we enter the show building at Disney World, we really get to notice that the leaves are a lot more realistic than they were at Disneyland. We will also see many familiar characters, but this time they're all over the place and kind of scattered around. And we also get to see a few additional ones, such as this group of fellows that are fishing. Well, kinda. This time we get the opportunity to see Brer Bear and Brer Fox stalk the rabbit for a little bit before they go on their little antics. And we also see that Brer Bear took his club with him, which is why it wasn't outside like in Disneyland, who must have left it at home. Another fun difference is the music. It's somewhat subtle. The main thing I find is the harmonica and trumpet interchange, but there's a few little other things. Just listen. And here's a couple of new characters, the porcupine and a raccoon playing some instruments. There's also this new scene of this other rabbit talking about how Fox and Bear are up to their usual antics. Also at this point, there's a scene where you get to see the silhouettes of Brer Rabbit with Brer Fox and Bear chasing after him. Here we find ourselves with a familiar scene. In Disneyland, the bear is over water. Here he's over land, and this time the fox has a hatchet in his hand and his hair's a little less crazy, and there's a How to Catch a Rabbit book that's also on the ground. Brer Bear's club is also underneath them. Shortly after this, there's another additional scene where we see Brer Rabbit hopping along. And we don't get him on the little train cart like we did in Disneyland. Here we find that same frog using an alligator as a hammock. Here we find possums overhead. However, there only appears to be 2, as there were 3 at Disneyland. We continue on our journey, passing various dwellings, and then we find ourselves at a somewhat familiar scene. However, this time, the fox is trying to help the bear, and there's a honeycomb right next to them. And as they are off to the left, Brer Rabbit is right above, laughing. Now back at Tokyo, as we enter the ride building, we find that the leaves are similar to that of Disneyland and Disney World. And we also start to notice that things are out of order yet again. This time we find Brer Bear and Fox stalking the rabbit right away. An interesting little takeaway from this scene is how much of the horizon we were able to see in Disney World, while this one is much more overgrown. And now we find a little band playing, but this time there's a dog joining them in a boat. Now we see the two little rabbits, but their house and garden got a severe downgrade. Now we find that toad and alligator fishing together again. Here we find Brer caught in that trap again, but this time there's no book on the ground. We now find an additional scene of Brer Rabbit standing in the mouth of a cave. We now find ourselves with what was the opening sequence at the other Splash Mountains. Now that this sequence is later on in the attraction, they're actually singing that second Laughing Play song instead of the first How Do You Do song. At this moment we see Brer Rabbit hopping by, similar to that we've seen in Disney World, but this time he just kind of goes all the way across, while at Disney World we see him kind of tucked back. Here we find a return of that Roadrunner that was at Disneyland, but seems to have been missing from Disney World, and we also got those possums yet again, but this time they're all sharing the same branch. Here we find that same alligator that was in Disneyland trying to bum a ride, but this time he's sticking out his thumb instead of having signs. There are also a few new and additional hitchhikers joining the party. As we approach the waterfall, we find a similar scene where Brer is stuck again, and we also have the fox helping out like in Disney World, but this time the rabbit is on the right side rather than overhead, and instead there's a couple of beehives in that spot. Now we're back at Disneyland going down that waterfall, which is pretty fun and has a nice little wave section to it. As we go around the bend, we find lots and lots of bees going around various honeycombs. Luckily, none of them can sting you. After we pass some colorful mushrooms, we find that Brer has a beehive stuck on his nose and is panicking. After we pass them, we find there's various, I guess, kind of geyser things with a bunch of animals enjoying them and having a good time. Here, Brer Rabbit has got himself stuck in some honey, and Brer Fox is right behind him, ready to take him. Here we get a huge tone shift, and it becomes quite eerie, and this scene is unique to Disneyland. We see a possum and a rabbit telling their offspring the misfortune that Brer Rabbit is getting himself into. Before we make our ascent to the climactic waterfall, we find a couple of vultures that are taunting us on our journey. This moment is topped off with eerie lightning strikes behind them.
So you're laughing like a snake. We'll show you the laughing place.
As we go down the waterfall in Disney World, we find something rather similar. There's the same wavy waterfall and we see a bunch of beehives all over. But this time we see Brer with the beehive on his nose panicking much earlier. The beehive on his nose also looks a little bigger, but that might just be me. There seems to be a lack of mushrooms entirely, as I can't find any. And there's also this new scene where Brer Rabbit is laughing instead of already being stuck in honey, and it is Brer Fox who bashes him with a honeycomb, and that's how he gets trapped. This secondary waterfall seems to be a little bit larger than the one that was at Disneyland. As we get to the area with the geysers, something that's really awesome is that there will be streams of water that will actually go overhead, and there's some different animals that are having some fun here. Instead of foxes, birds, and a dog, we have toads, turtles, and some gophers. Now that the eerie scene of the mothers talking to their children about the follies of Brer Rabbit, we now have this scene where Brer Fox has captured Brer Rabbit, who is stuck in a honeycomb. As we approach the vultures, this time they're a bit more directly overhead instead of off to the left. And they're also much better dressed, wearing a silk top hat, as well as wearing cuffs with cufflinks. Now we're back at Tokyo, and as we go down that waterfall, we find ourselves in a familiar scene. But this time it's just bees, bees, and more bees until we get to that secondary waterfall. But hey, the mushrooms are back. Now we find Brer stuck in the honey at a similar location to that of Disneyland's. And then we also have the fox as well, where he captures Brer Rabbit with the honeycomb, but it's a bit better articulated with how he twists. In the cavern with these geysers, the structure seems to be strictly cave, while in Disneyland it had a whole bunch of roots, and in Disney World there were some like man-made supports. This scene where Brer Fox has Brer Rabbit in hand is quite similar, however there's a lot more honey overflowing at Disney World, and he appears to be missing his hatchet. Here are the vultures, and this time they do not have top hats, and there's also not the little lightning effect behind them. Now at Disneyland, as we ascend up this lift hill, we find the lair of Brer Fox, where Brer Rabbit is tied up, and we see the silhouette of Brer Fox laughing up a storm. And now we finally get to that climactic drop. Now we're outside for a little bit. We go under a few caves or overpasses, go by a few lightly scattered props, and then pass a waterfall that is on the right. As we enter the next show building, we find a couple of familiar faces that we've seen at the other Splash Mountains. Some differences here is that the animals in Disneyland don't seem to be wearing much clothes except for the ribbon around the raccoon's neck. In World, the raccoon is wearing a vest and a hat. At Tokyo, the raccoon is wearing that hat, but this time there's a black band on it instead of a red band, and he's wearing a bandana around his neck with shorts and a single suspender. Now the porcupine is wearing that red vest. The turtle that plays as the drum is also not present in Tokyo. As we get deeper in the show scene, we see a celebration of various animals, some sitting on some boxes, others in a hay cart, and a whole bunch on a riverboat. Here we see karma coming back in force, with Brer Fox having his tail stuck in the mouth of an alligator and Brer stuck in the briars. It appears that Brer Rabbit has made it safely home and all is well, but we kind of already knew this because it was spoiled to us early on in the queue. After passing this scene, we see an owl just kind of hanging out near the exit. Here near the end of the ride, we get a good look of this interesting little gate that appears to lift a portion of the track that allows the logs to enter and exit the main ride track. At Disney World, as we ascend up this lift hill, we see a similar scene from that at Disneyland, but it's a little differently dressed. And the Brer Fox silhouette is a lot less apparent. Here is additional footage that shows the silhouette a little bit better, but I don't even think I've seen this while actually riding the attraction, so it's something you need to look out for. Much like at Disneyland, this area doesn't have anything too special about it, but there are a few cosmetic differences, and the rockwork's a lot more rocky once again, and we still got this waterfall on the right side, but it's a little different as well. Entering this next showroom, we see that there is now a Welcome Home Brer Rabbit sign. On the right side, there's no longer the hay car with animals celebrating on it, but the alligators that are playing music are there as well, but this time they're a trio instead of a duo. The Zippity Lady is smaller and has significantly fewer animals on it. We also have a new group of animals playing some instruments. This scene where Brer Rabbit and Brer Bear get what's coming to them is fairly identical, but Disneyland the fox has that crazy white hair. At the last show scene, we see Brer Rabbit once again, but this time he is outside his house hanging out with a bluebird rather than inside his house. As the ride wraps up in Disney World, we see a painting of the lyrics "It's the truth, it's actual" on a wooden wall. Here there's a gate too, but this time it's kind of hidden as a warehouse. As we ascend up the lift hill in Tokyo, we see Brer Fox's lair on the right side, and we see the silhouette more reminiscent of that of Disneyland. Unique to Disneyland, Brer Rabbit looks a lot more horrified and is facing up with his ears down, which is not the case for Disney World or Tokyo. Something really interesting here is that the rabbit has wood under him in Disneyland and in Tokyo, making it seem like the fox just plans on having roasted rabbit. However, in Disney World there's an addition of a cauldron, and there's no wood underneath him, so clearly he wants to stew the rabbit. I find this Disney World anomaly rather intriguing. Once again, in this outside portion of the attraction, there's nothing too much to look at. However, this time there's a lot more overhang and cave that you're going through before you enter that next show building, and that waterfall is missing. As we enter this show building, we see that Brer, Bear, and Fox get their comeuppance much sooner. Some minor differences here is that the fox is missing his hat in Tokyo, the alligator is missing his hat in Disneyland, and also at Disneyland, the fox is nearly parallel to the water, as his dimensional counterparts are nearly standing upright, more like a 45-degree angle. As we take a closer look to the Zippity Lady, we see that it is nearly identical to that of Disney World's, but a little bit of a different color scheme. And the lights on board no longer have that running animation. Due to Disneyland having a larger boat, we also see that there's an addition of a couple more animals, including some foxes and even a dog. Past the Zippity Lady, we find those alligators that are playing a tune, but this time they're a duo, and they join that other band that was in that same location at Disney World. We have also found that "Welcome Back, Brer Rabbit" sign, but it was a little further back in the show scene. As we catch up with Brer Rabbit, we find a fairly familiar scene that is quite identical to that in Disney World with a few little differences. These include the mailbox being on a different side, the bluebird being perched on a branch instead of the mailbox, his carrying pouch is now on a chair that's on the other side of Brer Rabbit, and the front door is open. Also, the house seems a little bit smaller overall. One fun little post-ride experience that you can find only at Disneyland is they have this really awesome little penny pressing machine that mimics the drop of the ride. A neat and unique feature to Tokyo Disneyland is that when you go to view your photographs, there's this little splash overlay that prevents you from getting a solid picture of it yourself, and definitely incentivizes you to purchase a picture. This concludes the report on Parallel Disney Splash Mountain. If you are interested in future Parallel Disney reports, please consider subscribing. Thank you for your time, and if you have any suggestions on future Parallel Disney reports, please let me know in the comments.